Hi, now I wanted to make a video about how Odin and his brothers kill Ymir and create Midgard, disrupt the Jotun, and somehow that the first war is between the Aesir and the Vanir. But no, gone down a rabbit hole, and one of those things where there's leads to questions that take over your original idea, because obviously looking at the alternate translations of the sources of the Poetic Edda, Ymir is the first of the Jotun, and from him he creates 3 children. Ymir, who's apparently deemed the most important, mainly because Ymir then begets Ymir, who is basically the father of all Jotnar. All the Jotnar are descended from Ymir, and his family descended from Ymir. Now, what's glossed over are 2 things. Ymir has 2 siblings. I mean, there's a power of 3 thing, which obviously repeats quite often. But no details are given to the maiden who is born from one armpit of Ymir, in counter to Ymir being born from the other armpit. Little theory about that. Go back to that in a second. Because Ymir's 2 feet get it on and create a 6-headed son, of which no more is mentioned about, apparently. They're not worth mentioning. A 6-headed son and a daughter who we must either hypothesize about or believe just was not worth mentioning again. Now, in Voluspa, the seer remembers this time. Remembers being fostered and taken in. Now, this could be memories, tapping into the memories of the girl that is born through the magic, or perhaps the seer is this child. It's just a theory, a hypothesis, throwing it out there because obviously the source material of the Poetic Edda provides its obvious stories, and then you've got the hidden stories that are there for us to piece together, be bothered by, or ignore. That's a kind of one little rabbit hole with this female born of Ymir. I mean, it's quite possible, and probably more likely, that Ymir and this unnamed daughter of Ymir then create the Jotnar. Admittedly, that would make a lot more sense. The 6-headed son. I mean, it's just one of those things. deserve some exploration. I mean, it's maybe in a simplified term, a six-headed sun is almost like having, maybe we've simplified it in the modern age where we talk about people being two-faced. Maybe this sun had many faces and was deemed to have six faces, six-headed sun, which, as a hypothesis, going back to my original intention for this video, brings me to Loki. I mean, obviously there is some mistrust between the Aesir and the Jotnar, because obviously Odin and his brothers slay Ymir, and from it they create Midgard, and then you think really that's a large cosmological disturbance of which they build a wall around it to keep the Jotnar out. And for me, thinking about it and what's going on behind the scenes sort of perspective of this part in the Poetic Edda, you would expect the first war to be between the newly formed Aesir and the Jotnar. You'd very much expect that all of a sudden the founder of the Jotnar is murdered by a couple of Jotnar who then sort of change their names, create this new world, and yada yada yada, without there being repercussions. That really the first instance would then be revenge by the Jotnar against the Aesir and war. But no, it's made clear the first war is between the Aesir and the Vanir. So what prevents war? I mean, on one hand, it would make sense for the other Jotnar, Bergelmir, and his offspring, which probably includes Vafthrûdnir, might very well go, they just killed Ymir, created this world. Do we really want to go to war against them? They're a bit scary, a bit terrifying. They are powerful. We can't contend with them. That would make sense, I think. I think that's fair. But then, obviously, by the completion of the Luspa, it's clear that antagonism between the Aesir and the Jotnar gets to such extremes that Loki leads the Jotnar against the Aesir at Ragnarok. So for me, this is where, and obviously through the time period the Poetic Edda covers, the friendship or the blood bond between Odin and Loki is already in place. What we're talking about is any mentions of it is past tense. It's not something that's in effect during the course of the poems in the Poetic Edda. At this point, Balder is dead. Loki is responsible for that. Odin is taking actions, looking into things, But there's, other than Lokasenna, to my knowledge presently, there's no interactions between Odin and Loki, other than Loki going, "Hey Odin, we're meant to be best buds. We are bloodbound to one another. You said you would never drink beer or have a drink without me being present." So why has Loki got such a level of respect? What happened at the grassroots period in the past before the details of the Poetic Edda? And that's really where I want to put in the hypothesis that Loki is key. Low key. I mean, let's just ignore that bit. That Loki is integral to some sort of long game that prevents out and out war between the Aesir and the Jotnar at the time that Midgard is created. And obviously that creates sort of levels of forced alliance between Odin and Loki, with Loki being quite possibly playing both sides at the same time for Loki's own agenda. It's a hypothesis. I mean, really, it's looking at what's in the negative areas of what's discussed in the Poetic Edda. And let's say the rabbit hole of the six-headed sun, it feels plausible. Plausible is the word I'm going to use. It feels plausible that that could be Loki. And at the time of, and there's no suggestion that the death of Ymir was premeditated, just that Odin and his brothers decide to kill Ymir and create Midgard. On one hand, you can argue that there has to be a creation myth. Odin has to be integral to the creation myth, and it has to happen without too much explanation of the reasons. But I suppose when we've got limited resource material, we've got to look at that and look at it and look at, again, what's been recorded and passed down to us versus the possibilities that are within the spaces of the suggestions that then are not obvious to the casual observer, i.e. if we go back to these being recorded for historic circumstances by Christians, the information being given and recorded has to be such that has to get past the censorship of the church at the time, with a hope that if the religion and practice is being quashed, it has to survive somehow. Which I suppose brings us round to the fact that a modern saying about Norse paganism, animism, heathenry, Sartre, is that it's the religion with a lot of homework. And obviously, for a lot of people, that is probably, you got to look at these sources. You got a lot of reading up to do, which is fine for the history, but it's not just about the history, it's also about the practice and the continuation and development of it. And that extra homework includes your practice, contact with the gods, the spirits, and that if you believe it is a living religion that has been living for a long time and continues to evolve, and we need to connect to that and not just be anchored down by the Poetic Edda. Now, it brings round to the question, which you see surface quite often: do you think Ragnarok has happened? And that's a good question. A good question that at the moment I don't really have a solid answer to it. A lot of the time I think, no, it can't have happened, it mustn't have happened. And yet I can't say that with 100% certainty. But then I can't say it has happened with 100% certainty either. That is ongoing work. But moving back on track, there's a lot of things to be discovered, to reconnect to, and to see how it advances. I mean, obviously going back to Ragnarok, if it hasn't happened, then technically Loki is still imprisoned by the Aesir, unless there are tales we've not had recorded, or the way the game is played, for want of a better phrase, has changed, and we misrepresent what Loki stands for. Obviously, if Ragnarok has happened, then Loki is no longer a prisoner. Various stuff, etc. Ragnarok details as outlined in the Luspa debate, question, wonder, or simplify. It's the end of a phase, like our seasons and our years and months, etc, etc, etc. But really, I think the key thing in closing is there are these grassroots relationships, dynamics, that we have to take into consideration, and that was there a deal between Odin and Loki? And as a side note, as a comment in discussion with my wife, it feels like Loki is afraid of Thor, perhaps even Odin trusts Thor, but there's a certain amount of, when you read the Poetic Edda, it feels like these are the things that are ordained to happen and have to happen for a reason. And that's for a reason that's, again, between the spaces. It's not just a cool tale. It's something that's between the spaces that needs to happen. And Thor is very much the loose cannon that Loki fears for, because Thor isn't likely to play his part. That if he gets frustrated or angry, he's going to strike out and kill or destroy someone and misalign this destiny. It's almost like perhaps because of the impetuous nature of Thor, his unpredictable, that other than the fate written for him that he will slay Jormungandr and then after 9 steps fall dead from the venom, that Thor isn't really tied by those things, because an offhand comment can set him off. That Loki, like in Lokasenna, pushes his luck as far as he can, but doesn't trust Thor to not play his part, and that he might actually, you know, whip out Mjolnir and sever Loki's head from his shoulders. And that brings it back round to the whole where things stand between Odin and Loki. Because obviously at the start, or for the most part of the Poetic Edda up until Lokasenna, Loki is responsible for Baldur's death, and Odin is still bound by his oath or agreement with Loki. Thoughts? If you watch this video, thank you, and maybe offer up your own thoughts. This is an area for discussing these grey in-between areas that we can discover what's suggested or hinted at, or whether it's just sort of, dude, chill, I mean, you're thinking too hard about this stuff. That would be a fair comment too. That's a discussion, that's a debate, that's a theory. Thank you for watching. I'll see you next time. Cheers.